Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to range far again tonight. We're going to start with David Brenner, who died recently at the age of 78. Nice Jewish boy from Philadelphia who became one of the top stand-up comics of the era. Here's an AP report on the death of David Brenner.
Comedian David Brenner, who rose to fame in the 1970s and became a favorite on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, has died at his home in New York City. The gangly comedian appeared on The Tonight Show more than 150 times, first as a guest of Johnny Carson, and later as a substitute host for the show. Brenner was a regular on other TV shows. He also hosted his own syndicated TV talk show in 1987.
Well, as I said, he was a nice Jewish boy from Philadelphia. He moved to Chicago. He did some TV production in Chicago, The Lee Phillips Show, but it was too cold for him here, and he moved to New York City, and it took him a long time. He wasn't until his mid-30s that he made it as a stand-up comic, and here's his initial appearance on Johnny Carson in 1971.
One of the great kicks of doing the Tonight Show is the chance to present some new talent, and I'm glad you're in a crazy mood tonight, because this is a young man that we discovered for one of our regularly scheduled auditions. This is his first appearance on television. He's very clever, somewhat warped. Which is, if you're going to do comedy, you should be a little bit warped, I think. Would you welcome for the first time on The Tonight Show, Mr. David Brenner. David?
Warped. I saw something interesting the other day. I was driving in New Jersey, and I got lost. And I always get lost in New Jersey. That whole state looks the same to me. Well, I think they have 7 people and 9 trees, and they keep moving it down the road.
It's always a great kick to see somebody appear for the first time in front of a national audience and do that well. You're really rooting for him. I don't think David was going to come back. He says, I did good. Why should I come back?
Well, it turned out he came back frequently, and he got the coveted honor that every stand-up comic wanted when they were on The Tonight Show. He got invited to sit down with Johnny and banter. As they all say, that's how you knew you'd made it.
So I went out and I saw something great in the supermarket, and I thought, oh, this is great. And then I realized, everything's a con. They're selling, I don't know if you saw these, they're individually sliced slices of cheese. They're round for hamburgers, so that, to make cheeseburgers.
Right.
Great idea. So I buy a package. I go around the corner, the other aisle, they're selling cheese corners.
That's good merchandising.
Yes. Good merchandising.
So David Brenner was of that generation of comedians of the 60s, 70s, and 80s where if you made it on Johnny Carson, you had really made it, and it launched your career, and indeed it launched his career. Little trivia on David Brenner: his wife was the former pair figure skater Ty Babylonia. I always like a good tombstone epitaph, and David Brenner's is, if this is a joke, I don't get it. We're going to talk about Roger Hilsman, who died recently at the age of 94. And Roger Hilsman was an advisor to President Kennedy on Vietnam in the early 60s. He was a West Point graduate. He actually had a pretty interesting history. He was with a commando unit in World War II known as Merrill's Marauders. They were the precursor to our special forces. And after he was wounded, he was transferred to the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, and he actually took part in a parachute rescue mission to liberate a Japanese prisoner of war camp in Manchuria. And one of the prisoners that he liberated was his father, who asked him what took him so long when he got there. Anyway, after the war, he was nosing around Washington. He was doing a bunch of stuff. I'm not exactly sure what he was doing half the time. Sounds like it was CIA stuff. But one of the people he became friendly with was the senator from Massachusetts, John Kennedy. When Kennedy became president in 1960, he made Hilsman a special advisor on foreign policy, and Hilsman had a role as an intermediary in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but his main assignment became Vietnam, where he advocated a counterinsurgency strategy in 1962 and 1963. As the Assistant Secretary of State for Far Eastern Affairs, he is best known for authoring a controversial memorandum suggesting the United States should abandon its support of Ngo Dinh Diem. We talked in depth about Ngo Dinh Diem when we did the podcast on Nguyen Cao Ky. Diem and his brother, Ngo Dinh Nhu, were the strongmen in South Vietnam, along with Nhu's wife, Madame Nhu, the Dragon Lady, whose podcast we've also done. In August '63, Hilsman's memo didn't say anything about a coup or an assassination, but a lot of people took it as giving authority to the South Vietnamese military to depose Diem and his brother. And it was a pretty good bet, the way things worked out there at that time, that that was going to be the end for Diem, which it was. And they were assassinated about 3 weeks before John Kennedy was assassinated, and that led to all the instability in the South Vietnamese government. There's always been a lot of controversy about whether Kennedy himself actually knew about or even authorized the assassination of Ngo Dinh Diem. and Hilsman was right in the middle of that. After Kennedy was assassinated, Hilsman was not on good terms with Lyndon Johnson, so he left the Johnson administration and he went and became an academic. And for the rest of his life, he sort of justified Kennedy's approach to Vietnam, saying he never would have sent in military troops and things like that. I mean, maybe that's true. That's another one of those things that we're never going to know. Hilsman was gone from the scene by the time of the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, and he was critical of Johnson and McNamara and Dean Rusk, all those guys. And you don't really know whether that was a whitewash by another early Kennedy man. A lot of them like to do that. I don't know if Hilsman was one of them, but a lot of them like to wash their hands about their involvement in Vietnam before it really took a bad turn. But it is quite possible Hilsman just saw the situation better than most of the other people. Unfortunately, he's always going to have that cable about Diem as part of his legacy. So Roger Hilsman should be remembered as one of those fascinating figures from the Kennedy administration who had an early role in Vietnam. Another guy who died recently with a mixed legacy was Joe McGinniss, who died at the age of 71. Joe McGinniss was a great author, primarily nonfiction, and his two most important books were The Selling of the President, which he wrote about the 1968 presidential campaign, where he shadowed Richard Nixon, and Fatal Vision, about a highly publicized murder in 1970, where he followed around an Army doctor, Jeffrey McDonald, who was accused of killing his wife and two children and ultimately convicted of the crime. The Selling of the President, whose title was a takeoff on the 1960 book by Theodore White, The Making of the President, was a big bestseller. It was the first time that people had linked advertising and political campaigns, and it made McGinniss a celebrity. He was the youngest author on the bestseller list since Anne Frank. He was also the forerunner to all the books since then, of all the campaigns since then, about focus groups and campaign slogans and how you package political candidates. With that under his belt, he undertook Fatal Vision, where he followed Jeffrey McDonald during his murder trial. And he said that originally he believed that McDonald was innocent, but as he was writing the book and collected more information, he began to believe that McDonald was guilty, and the book turned out to be a scathing indictment of McDonald. Well, that didn't sit well with McDonald, who was convicted of the crime, so he sued McGinniss, and he got a little bit of a settlement out of a $15 million lawsuit with no admission of wrongdoing by McGinniss. But there were all sorts of claims and counterclaims. But in one respect, it was sort of the beginning of the end of McGinnis's career. Fatal Vision is actually a great book, and they made one of the best made-for-TV movies about it, with Gary Cole as Jeffrey McDonald. Gary Cole is one of the best TV performances I've ever seen.
I was dizzy, I wasn't really real alert. My teeth were chattering, and I went down and to the bedroom. My wife was lying on the floor next to the bed, and there was a knife in her upper chest. I pulled it out. I tried to give her artificial respiration, but the air was coming out of her chest.
But down the line, there were later repercussions for Joe McGinniss about Fatal Vision, and this is according to the Washington Post. The case took another turn in 1989 when Janet Malcolm wrote a two-part series for The New Yorker. The Journalist and the Murderer later published as a book. Her opening lines have been repeated in journalism seminars ever since. What she wrote was, "Every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He is a kind of a confidence man, preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust, and betraying them without remorse." Miss Malcolm dissected Mr. McGinnis's entire career, saying she found evidence of deceit and a willingness to ingratiate himself with people he later betrayed. Others looked at the case, including filmmaker Errol Morris, who harshly criticized Mr. McGinniss in a 2012 book. Meanwhile, McDonald continued a series of legal appeals of his conviction, all of which has been rejected in court. Mr. McGinniss wrote a long point-by-point rebuttal of Miss Malcolm's article, but in some way he never overcame the suspicion that he betrayed the trust of a source. Washington Post doesn't tell you that Janet Malcolm wrote that in part because she was accused of journalistic malfeasance in one of her books, but I guess that's not germane to what we're talking about here. As a guy who started out as a great journalist, McGinniss sort of lost it. In the 1990s, he wrote a book about Edward Kennedy, where he took a lot of liberties with the facts, as it were. And then in 2010, he wrote a book about Sarah Palin. He'd actually moved next to her in her house in Alaska, wrote all sorts of sordid stuff that was pretty demeaning to him, more demeaning to him than it was to her. So I guess we could conclude by saying that the Joe McGinniss story was a story of great writing talent that was ultimately squandered. We're going to close tonight with Richard Coogan, who died at the age of 99. He nearly made it to 100. He was Captain Video in one of the most popular series of the early years of television on the DuMont Network, Captain Video and his Video Rangers. Yes, it was cheesy. Yes, it was low budget. but the kids loved it. If you were lucky enough to own a television set in 1949, here's what you would hear.
Captain Video! Captain Video! Electronic weapon, master time, space, guardian of the safety of the world.
Fighting for law and order, Captain Video operates from a mountain retreat with secret agents at all points of the globe. Possessing scientific secrets and scientific weapons, Captain Video asks no quarter and gives none to the forces of evil. Stand by for
Captain Video and his Video Rangers.
Yeah, he asked no quarter and he gives none. Here Richard Coogan tells a very touching story about what Captain Video meant to one of his young fans.
I got a call one day from a doctor, and he said, I have a patient as a young boy, and he was burned about over 2/3 of his body. But the point of my call is, you are his hero. He looks at you every day on the TV. It's the only thing he lives for now, but the boy is like suicidal. And do you think that you could come over and talk to him in some way supportive and help him get over this? So I said, I'll be glad to.
Did you come in character? Did you come dressed as Captain Video?
Oh, yeah. And I went over and they told me ahead of time that there were about 30 kids in that burn ward. And so I was prepared for everything. But a nurse took me around. I said, let me go to the other kids. I'll save him till last. Because I looked over at this boy there, and he recognized me as Captain Video. And I know what he was going through. How the heck could I be there? Anyway, I talked to the other kids, and I gave him a Captain Video ring and a picture. But then when I got to him, I said, I understand that you won't eat the food and you won't do what the doctors tell you. Well, let me ask you something. I said, would you like to be one of my rangers? If I had said, get up out of this bed, he would have tried. So I said, all right, you can be it, but you got to do this. You got to start right now doing what the doctors and the nurses tell you to do. And I'm going to check up on you. So meantime, here's this ring. That's a Captain Video ring. And here's my picture. Well, when I left, I said to the nurse, I hope this does the trick. But that boy just couldn't believe that I was there. So I checked back on him regularly. And he did an about face and got out of that attitude and that condition just because of a television person that he saw that walked into the ward.
Well, everybody knows who Captain Video's biggest fan was. It was Ed Norton. When he and Ralph Cramden bought a television set, he had to watch Captain Video on one of the great Honeymooners episodes.
Calling all Space Rangers, it's time to blast off with Captain Video and his Video Rangers.
Hello out there, Rangers. This is Captain Video. Are you all ready to join me today in our trip to outer space?
I am ready, Captain Video.
Very good. Let us all put on our official Captain Video space helmets. Adjust disintegrator gun.
Disintegrator gun adjusted, Captain Video.
And now we blast off for Pluto and the moon.
What a great episode. And we're going to say goodnight, Captain Video. Well, we're going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. And of course, that whole Captain Video episode was prompted by Alice wanting a television set.
We're going to go to the moon. Do you want to go to the moon?
That would be an improvement, too. Now, let me tell you something, Mr. Financial Security. I want a television set, and I'm going to get a television set. I have lived in this place for 14 years without a stick of furniture being changed. Not one. I am sick and tired of it. And I'm left here to look at that icebox, that stove, that sink, and these four walls. Well, I don't want to look at that icebox, that stove, that sink, and these four walls. I want to look at Liberace.
Well, Alice, here he is for you.
The Chopin A-flat major Polini.
Officials, face helmet off! Captain Video, wherever you